All right, we are back here on the Halloween Pop Culture Party 2 podcast. This year, we are starting things off with the big movie of the week. Dune is out. Dune has gotten a lot of positive reviews here. Joining me today on the podcast to break it all down, our resident film critic, Jon Stanko, is here. Jon, how are you?
I'm doing great, Mike. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. I'd say it did pick me up to get a chance to check out this movie, which I know was supposed to come out last year. COVID delayed it, and it has been very well received.
I think it's been well received by everybody. The critics have liked it a lot. Fans, both of the book, of the original book, and just of the movie as a whole, seem to enjoy it as well. I think Denis Villeneuve has stepped onto something, and his ambition has hit the mark. And this thing is getting rave reviews, and it'll be around for the rest of the year and heading into award season as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a movie I'm excited about. And last year we kicked off the Halloween Pop Culture Party with the Mandalorian season premiere came out around this time. But this year, I think the movie, was a more widestream appeal than Mando.
Yeah, I would say so. But I mean, there's some comparisons you can make there about a prophetic figure needing to take the course and change history. So you can draw some strings between Dune and Star Wars. And I think especially with the visuals that Denis Villeneuve put into the movie, definitely some Star Wars connotations there with the dual moons and the dual suns and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we go any further, we're going to play the spoiler warning here. I did the main spoiler soundtrack at the top of the show, but for the rest of the podcast, and some of the stuff I'm covering later on here is a bit darker and gloomier. We're going to have an uplifting spoiler song here. So here's where we're going with the spoilers for the rest of the podcast. All right, you've been warned, Jon. If they have not watched Dune, they need to stop the podcast right now, go watch Dune, and come back once they want to be spoiled.
Yeah, safe to say. And there's a lot to talk about with this movie, so we're going to be touching on a lot of different things.
Absolutely. And let's start off here with the way this movie was made. Because I mean, there's a failed attempt this back in '84 with what's his name? David Lynch tried to do it. He got his proposed cut got slashed down. They had to cut a lot out. It would not end up well. What's the background here with this? How did we end up getting this thing being so iconic? People want to make a movie out of it.
Well, Dune is known as a book that cannot be made to film or to TV. It is a book full of lore. It is a book that is, frankly, you need to have kind of like an acid trip kind of mind to understand everything that is in the story of Dune, not just the original book, but in the series as a whole. So, I mean, the first attempt at it was David Lynch back in the 80s, and he tried to concise the entire first book into 2.5 hour movie. And in the process, really changed the entire story, changed the entire vibe, and cut out too many crucial parts. Now, with that being said, in the years past, people have grown to appreciate the movie for a cult movie, has some positive aspects. I watched it. I was entertained, though I understood it wasn't a good and well-made movie, if you will. And David Lynch really kind of disowned the movie and said it wasn't his original dream and just too many people got their hands in it. There was another attempt by an American French filmmaker, Jodorowsky, I believe his name is. There was a documentary that came out about him and the drawings that he had for Dune, his aspirations of it about 5 or 6 years ago. But that movie never came to fruition either. And now it comes to Denis Villeneuve, who is a man known for his ambition with every movie he's ever made. And this, I guess, was a passion project of his. And we have Dune Part 1 that finally came out. It took a long time to come out. As you mentioned, supposed to come out COVID last year, but we finally got it this past weekend. And thankfully, he didn't cut much from the book. It's very, very true to the telling, and it's true to the vibe and the symbolism as well that's intertwined throughout the story. So we finally got here, Mike, and guess what? It's really good.
It is really good. And you also took the step further. You went back and read the book again. You had the audio book version, I believe you said on the podcast here. So how helpful was that for you to keep track of what was going on here? Because I did not have that luxury. So I admit, it was very dense for me. Once I got into the flow, I started really enjoying it.
I mean, it was a huge help. Just understanding the houses, their relationship, the language of Dune, which there's a lot of words that are just kind of thrown around. You just kind of have to understand the different secret agendas from the Bene Gesserit to the Harkonnens to the Atreides to the Emperor and all those political intertwining battles that happen. It was incredibly helpful. I think my girlfriend loved it as well because I was able to give her a 3 to 5 minute synopsis of who everyone was before going in. So she was able to understand everything as it happened. And I think what's really good about if you read the book, you pick up on some of the non-verbal storytelling that Villeneuve and the screenwriters are doing within this movie, hinting at things that happen in the book, but not necessarily saying them outright. So if you have that extra knowledge, you're able to pick that up and see the visual storytelling that Villeneuve is saying, but also realize how concise and how, honestly, I don't want to say perfect, Mike, but just darn great job they did of never cutting out an important scene from the book, but they were able to shrink every scene down to its essence. And sure, there are some shortcuts taken in conversations that are cut down for lengthwise, but they never took out anything important. They perfectly shrink wrap this for everyone to understand whether you read the book or you didn't.
Yeah, for those who have not read the book, how long is the book?
The book in terms of audio hours was about 28 hours long.
Jeez.
I believe. It's long, man. It's thick. Like it's like Game of Thrones. They said how Game of Thrones can never be like transcribed to the screen, right? There were too many characters, too many movie pieces. The same thing is said for Dune.
Yeah. The way I look at this movie when I was watching it, it sort of feels like a Game of Thrones Star Wars had a baby, and then like this was what they came up with.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you throw in some Lord of the Rings in there with some of the fantasy aspects and the premonitions and stuff. It really is a lot like that. You can describe the houses like you would from Game of Thrones. The Harkonnens are the Lannisters. The Starks are the Atreides. Like you can make those direct comparisons and make it easy for everyone to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And for like you said, you gave your girlfriend the 3 to 5 minute synopsis here to help people help the movie. Like you want to give a short synopsis in your opinion of like the general premise of where we got to in part one.
So where we got to in part one was, so part one of the movie is parts 1 and 2 of the original book. And so, I mean, we have the dueling political ideals of, we got the Atreides, we got the Harkonnens, we have the Emperor who thinks that both of these houses under his rule are getting a little bit too powerful. I don't know how deep you want me to get into the plot, but basically the Atreides take over the house, take over the planet Arrakis, informally known as Dune, from the Harkonnens. The Harkonnens are not happy about it at all. They devise a plan with the Bene Gesserit to get their planet back and to kill the Atreides family. And amongst this Atreides family is this young boy by the name of Paul, who has been genetically bred by the Bene Gesserit and his mother, Lady Jessica, to be the Azum El Gaib. I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, tough language, but the El Gaib, a person who would meld the idea of mind and time and be a unifying prophet for the entire universe. And so this story is about some of the political intertwinings, the Harkonnens getting the best of the Atreides, and the growth of Paul and learning what his destiny may be. This movie does not go all the way there. It stops right before it gets really meta, but it's parts 1 and 2 of the book. And as Zendaya, as Chaney says at the end of the movie, this is only the beginning.
Yeah, perfect line to end the movie, because I do think some of in the layman's terms, people who are watching it, like you are basically following Paul the whole movie and Timothy Chalamet's character, and we're going on the hero's journey with him, where we see where he's basically starting his quest to, I would say, I'm not going to spoil the end of the book here, like it's sort of be the leader of his people and stuff like that, and unify different groups and stuff, so on and so forth. We see him lose his entire support system basically along the way. Like his father dies, and everybody except his mother dies, and then he ends up with the native people, the Franier tribe, or
the Fremen,
the Fremen tribe, and that's where we end the movie. So I thought it was basically, you realize that you go in knowing that this is part 1 of a 2-part epic here. I think you understand it much better if you're like, hey, there's more coming.
Yeah, now it was not advertised as that, which was an interesting choice, I think, to many as to why they didn't advertise this as part 1. But we were talking before the podcast that there was no for sure that part 2 was going to be greenlit, even though I cannot imagine in closed doors that part 2 and 3 weren't already greenlit. They're going to happen eventually. But again, if you understand this is only the first part of the journey, you'll be able to appreciate this movie for a lot more. It's a lot like the Fellowship of the Ring, the first movie. Some people complain that ending wasn't great because nothing really happened. You didn't know where the story was going from there. It wasn't satisfying. Some people are saying this about Dune, but have faith in the story. Have faith in Villeneuve, because the story gets wild really fast.
Yeah, because like apart from like moving Paul Chalamet's character along the plot here, not much else happens in terms of like you get like big picture stuff being set up. There's a lot of setup in this movie, I think.
I mean, people who say things don't happen. We have major characters die. We got political backstabbing. We got exposition thrown in there as well. There's good hand-to-hand combat. There's explosions. There's giant sandworms. Mike, there's plenty of stuff that happens in this movie. So I don't buy anyone who says that nothing happens. I'm just saying that not the most of what could have happened happens within part one. Be ready for part two when shit gets even more crazy.
Yeah, for sure. And let's dive into some of this cast here. As we mentioned Timothy Chalamet already, but there are a lot of heavy hitters in this cast. You have Zendaya, who's barely in this movie, by the way. She's been a much bigger part of part two, but she's been basically appearing in like sort of flash forwards for Paul, where he sees glimpses of his future. We had Oscar Isaac. We had Jason Momoa. We had a lot of heavy hitters in this cast. Dave Bautista. I feel like if you know somebody who was an interesting actor, like they were in here somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, this movie had a ton of people. Josh Brolin, you can't forget Javier Bardem as well, Stellan Skarsgård. This movie had a ton of people. So, I mean, I want to ask you, Mike, who stood out to you when you're watching this movie? The characters, the performances, was there anyone that stood out to you?
I have to say, I appreciate Oscar Isaac's work there as the father of the Atreides clan as Leto, but I think he
Yeah.
had a very good role there. I also thought the doctor who had to stab them in the back to try and get his wife back also gave a very nuanced performance.
Yeah, it was very good. I agree with you that Oscar Isaac probably, if you're going to look at a performance that is award worthy, quote unquote, I think Oscar Isaac has that part where he brought the humanity to a fantasy science fiction story in the way he approached things. He had a lot of subtle acting to do, but he also got to give a big speech to Paul about no matter what, Paul is still his son. So he kind of hit all those hallmarks, and he did a really good job. And with the role of Duke Leto Atreides. And I think one thing we can say is that he's not going to win any awards, but Jason Momoa was having a blast as Duncan Idaho in this movie.
Oh, he was
He
having
had,
some fun.
he had the most fun role, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he shows up. He's basically fighting people. He's being the big brother to Paul. Like he's enjoying
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah, he gets to be sassy. He gets to crack some jokes. He gets to kick some ass. I mean, there's no denying Jason Momoa. I don't know if it's just the kind of character that he plays in every movie he is, but he's just having a blast in this movie, and you're rooting for him. He's one of the few characters who smiles. There's not a lot of smiling. There's not a lot of laughing in this movie, but he's kind of the one who emotes the most.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think of Chalamet's performance? Because I feel like he had today a very delicate balance of like trying to understand responsibility at the same time, not be like a whiny teen like some of these like superheroes. Be like, he avoided having the Luke Skywalker eyes in episode 4. I think where he avoided having like the I want to go to Tashi station get some power converters moment. I think he did a pretty good job balancing that.
I think he did a really good job. I think he did a great job of balancing the wonder of him being a young kid. He's supposed to be 15 years old, I believe. In the book, he's 15. I think he's a little bit older in the movie here. But a young man being immersed in a world that he's not used to. There's a shot where the ambassador for the emperor and the ships of the ambassador are coming down onto Caladan, the home planet of the Atreides, and it's them coming down slowly. It's Villeneuve setting the scene for this ambassador ceremony that's going to happen. And then the next shot is Paul Atreides looking up at the sky in awe. So he did a great job of showing he's still young in this world, but he also had the scene with the Gom Jabbar test with the lady mother of the Bene Gesserit, where he stuck his hand in the box for the test of pain and willpower. That acting in that scene was incredible for Chalamet, because when he stares up, I need to remember the mother's name. She's played by Charlotte Rampling, Reverend Mother Mohiam of the Bene Gesserit. You see his eyes lock with hers behind the veil, and he's balancing different emotions in that stare of pain, of determination, of anger, of frustration. Phenomenal acting there. So I think Chalamet did a really, really good job having to balance a lot of things. It's going to get even more a little bit wonky when Paul gets more godlike and gets more premonitions, and I want to see how crazy Villeneuve and Chalamet take it. But even when this movie started to get a little bit more trippy with the visions as it went on, it was still based in some realism, which is a credit to Chalamet and the screenplay.
Yeah, definitely. I want to touch on Paul's power set for sure, because like we get teases of what he can do. Like we get like the snippets of him learning about the voice, where it's basically like translates some sort of like he speaks, he controls the minds of other people, and then we see some of his future visions, and we see other things he can do. So I gotta feel like the further we get along in this, it wasn't a ton in part one. I feel like once you get to part 2 and part 3, like he's gonna start being like god level powers.
Yeah, in terms of the book that I've read, the original book, he definitely grows more accustomed to the powers that he is able to develop. Though with that being said, while he's also understanding the powers that he has, being the uh the Bene Gesserit's Muzam Al Gaib kind of figure where he control time and space, he's also learning the desert power of the Fremen.
Yep.
And so that's kind of a battle that he has in the book, is the tangible ability in the desert to learn the trade of the Fremen and what makes them strong as people, and also the intangible abilities for him to see forward in time and the different futures that he has for himself and for the people he cares about. So that's what happens in part 3 of the book, is he's battling these two things and has to weigh one or the other at times. So he's going to have a challenge with doing that. He becomes a very powerful figure and he has to grow into leadership. Like Duke Leto says in the movie, that there's a call that Paul will answer if he wants to, and that moment comes for him in part 3 of the book, which may or may not be directly connected to his powers. That I won't spoil for you, Mike, because you haven't read it and you don't know.
Yeah, I do not know, which I'm fine staying unspoiled on that because I don't think I'm gonna have the time to read all of Dune like anytime soon. So I will.
You got till 2023.
Yeah.
So you could read that first book.
Yeah, well, right now there's stuff going on behind the scenes. I'm potentially going back and watching Game of Thrones, like so I can be ready for the prequel show. So that might be fair.
That's gonna take a lot of time.
That will. So I don't know if I'll get to Dune. So I'll leave that off of there for now. But what other performances stood out to you in the cast?
I love Javier Bardem as Stilgar. The vibe of this character, it was just so perfectly played by Bardem. When he's first introduced to Duke Leto, Gunnar, and the whole Atreides family, he spits on the floor. They think it's an insult, but really, Duncan Idaho's like, no, it's a sign of respect. Yeah. He's relinquishing his liquid for you. Yeah. Everything about him was very funny. When he meets with Lady Jessica at the end of the movie, and he's like, "Oh, I didn't know you were a wielder of weapons," and it just kind of like is humbled but accepts the humble moment that he has. He's not too egotistical with it. Javier Bardem was great as Stilgar. He's just a great actor, and he fit the vibe really well. And then Stellan Skarsgård, I want to give a shout out to, playing Baron Harkonnen. His voice is what makes this character work really well.
Yeah.
Because the way he's portrayed in the movie is different than the book. In the book, he's like a sluggish, ugly, unable to move type of guy. But really, he's described like a Jabba the Hutt type of person. Again, comparing this to Star Wars. But that's what he's described like in the book. In the movie, he has a little bit more freedom in terms of mobility with the floating pants, basically just floating over the ground. But Stellan Skarsgård's voice work and the evil that he's able to tune into whenever he's talking to whatever character he's talking to, you can just tell he's innately malevolent. And so I want to give credit to Skarsgård for that, because he didn't have a lot of screen time in part 1 here. He becomes more of an asset in part 2 going forward, but he did a really good job as the Baron.
Yeah, for sure. And I also want to touch on here, the thing I think that's got winning this movie Oscars is just the visuals and the scope of this film. It's like you really transports you into like a whole other world when you're watching the movie. Like the visuals are just stunning, whether it's the Dune planet itself, whether it's like the spaceships, all of the stuff like that. The visuals they do in here, I mean, it starts immediately. I think beginning when you first see Shani and the Fremen, when you see the blue eyes from the exposure to the spice, like that they did that very well, where it doesn't look like cartoonish, but potentially it could have.
No, I mean, this is just Denis Villeneuve being an absolute magician. This is just what he does. He is so good at measuring out scale and scope in every movie that he does. He takes his time setting the scenes, but then he's able to put the scene in perspective where it will still shock you. The spaceships look small in space, but then when they're on the planet, they look massive. The people next to the space, everything is framed for you to take it and make an observation about how big something is compared to something else. The flyover on Dune of the major city where Paul and his family are staying, it reminded me of Minas Tirith from Lord of the Rings: Return of the King, with that scale that Peter Jackson built, where they had that overhead shot just showing everything about Minas Tirith heading up to the top. It was that kind of visual that's really, really cool. Everything about this movie, the scale of it is just utterly phenomenal. I think Denis Villeneuve and Rian Johnson are two of the best doing this right now. So everything about this movie from a visual standpoint is phenomenal. And I think you look at it just from a directing standpoint too, and able to connect the story visually that way. You got to think Villeneuve is going to be in the best director running at the Oscars because nobody thought Dune could be made into a good movie, and he's already made it into something that everyone appreciates. So that's got to give him extra bonus points too, besides just the way it looks.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the scale thing you mentioned earlier. Is the fact that you see these shots, especially like on the planet itself, on Arrakis, where you see Paul and Lady Jessica look so tight compared to these big dunes they have to traverse to get to the Fremen like tribe. So I thought it was fascinating. So again, playing with
You have to make sand look interesting. That's
yeah.
not an easy thing to make interesting. It's a bland landscape.
Yeah.
It's just orange and brown, but they make it look interesting. And also, in terms of the visuals and the scope, I think something we talked about spaceships, right? We talked about buildings, we talked about planets. The sandworms. We can't go this long without talking about the sandworms.
No.
Dude, they were dope. There's a chance that those could have been so cheesy, Mike. Those could have been just, oh, that's ugly. Oh, that's obscene. But no, the way he works them into the story, it's kind of like a natural monster. There was no big reveal of like a sandworm. It was just like they were there, they were part of the environment, and so it forced the audience to appreciate it as just part of that world. There was no massive shocking moment.
Yeah.
So they were awesome, and the scale of those as well, just super cool. So again, the scope and the visuals of this movie are really, really well done.
Yeah, for sure. And again, we're not gonna attempt to go through the plot beat by beat here because again, we could spend 3 hours on this if we wanted to going through the plot. But I would say let's go here. What's your most memorable moment here? What stuck out the most for you watching this movie? What was the most memorable point of this film?
So the Gamju Bar scene in the beginning with Paul and the mother lady mother of the Bene Gesserit, I thought that scene was phenomenal. That scene opens up the book and it's riveting and it grabs you right away, as did this scene. I thought it was phenomenal. Rebecca Ferguson acting out the nervousness of Lady Jessica because she knows what's at stake with this test, even when Paul doesn't necessarily know. I thought that scene was remarkable. I love the introduction of the Sardaukar when they are brought on as part of the Emperor's warrior, helping out the Harkonnens. When they were lowered down onto Arrakis through the ropes quietly and just surrounding the Atreides army. That's a really cool intro to these deadly warriors, which I really enjoyed. Something I knew and I wasn't expecting. But there's one shot that I'm just going to be nerdy about that I freaking love, Mike. And it was when they were still on Caladan. It's early on in the movie, but it's Villeneuve doing some visual storytelling that people who read the book may recognize and people may not. But there's a scene that after Paul talks to his father, Paul reaches into a puddle and then he picks up sand underneath the puddle. And it's a split second thing. It's only just like Paul, like seeing the landscape around him, right? But if you think about it, I mean, Dune is a sand planet. Paul is reaching for the sand. Where he's born was Caladan, a planet that was rich with water and resources that are needed to grow. Paul is reaching into both environments and able to put his hand on both and feel both. That is visual storytelling of the fate of Paul and what he can mean for the Fremen and everyone that is on Dune. That piece of visual storytelling, that is just a 2-second small cut that nobody would think was that important. Watching the movie, I was like, Villeneuve knows exactly what he is doing. That was one of the most memorable moments for me where I knew that I was in great hands.
Yeah, I'd say I definitely love this thing going all the way through. And I did think once you go in, I think they did a good job not teasing it out. But once they put part one on the screen, on the title screen at the beginning of it, you say, okay, like they intend, there's more of a story. You're not going to have a nice, neat ending here. Like they gave you an ending point, but like you know, there's plenty more story coming.
There is plenty of more story coming. And I believe the plan is to make, I believe, this a trilogy, which is going to go over the 3 books.
Yeah.
So there are 3 main books as well, which I will now be reading the other 2 for sure. So there's a lot of story to tell. I don't know all of it, but all I know is that part 3 of the original book, some big events happen, and the ending of the original Dune book is tense, to say the least. So very excited for what's in the future.
Yeah, it sounds like a good place where I could see them going, like, especially in part 2, if you're going to have that be the middle part of your trilogy here. That a good place if it's the end of book 1 is 10 of the first book of Dune is very intense. Good place to start and just hook your audience. Say, "Oh, come back in 2 years for the end of the trilogy here."
Yeah, I mean, listen. I'm really curious if they're going to film, if this is going to be a trilogy, if they're going to film parts 2 and 3 together at the same time to save time again, I'm just saying time a lot, but to save time for the crew and the actors and everything, just to get those two movies done at the same time. Because it's not often that a huge blockbuster like this films the first movie and then everyone goes away.
Yeah.
It's not like Lord of the Rings where Peter Jackson just filmed the entire 3-movie set all at the same time. So be curious to see what they do with the sequels when they're coming forward. But regardless, I think everyone should be excited.
I'll be excited too. I also feel like I'm encouraged. I feel like this is not going to be Avatar, where we have this one stellar movie that we never hear about again for another 15 years.
No.
This we're going to actually get this in 2 years.
Yeah, Villeneuve is not going to let that happen. And also, you should take a huge sign of credit as to why Dune is just good is that Christopher Nolan freaking loved it too. He went on the record saying that Dune was awesome. So that's another person who says everyone should check it out.
Yeah, and when Christopher Nolan puts a stamp of approval on something, you pay attention.
Yeah, I would say so. Now we got to just look for Quentin Tarantino's opinion. And if he says yes, it's green check marks all around.
Yeah, and what's the grade on this one on the Stanko scale?
I gave this movie an A-. I think the only tidbit that you could take away from it is maybe it's a tad bit too long with Paul and Lady Jessica in the desert looking for the Fremen. Maybe just a smidge, but I plan on rewatching this. My grade may change on my rewatch, but is an A- and 4.5 out of 5 stars.
A very high praise from Jon Stanko.
Yes, and also fun fact: every Denis Villeneuve movie I've seen thus far in my spreadsheet has been an A-. I've seen 5 of his movies. And they've all been A-. So guess what? He's just really good.
Yeah, he is really good. And we're going to put it out there to Dune. Go see it. And if possible, get to a theater and see it because the big screen makes a gigantic difference.
Oh, you need to. And the score, too. Let's not forget Hans Zimmer. It is loud. It is in your face. And it is very percussion heavy and choral heavy. There's a lot of singing that goes on in the background of some important scenes. And you get the most of that when you go to a movie theater.
Yeah, what was the theater experience like for you when you went?
The theater experience, like for me, there was only probably about 10 to 15 people in there, pretty empty, but it was good. The people around me and my girlfriend behaved, which was nice. No cell phones pulled out, which was wonderful. I wish that they would have cranked the sound up a little bit more in our theater, but you know what, Mike? We're back in the theater. That's all that matters. I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I also mentioned here, Jon Stanko went out like in the middle of the day on a football Sunday. That's probably why there were only 10 to 15 people in the theater.
Oh, I did. You know what? It was not a good football slate for this Saturday or this Sunday. So I was like, this is a date weekend. Saturday, I'll go out with Emma and her friends and my friends too, but like her friends from home. Sunday, I'll do the movie and we'll do a nice French dinner out. So that's what we did. But Mike, you want to know another great part about Dune? One more thing. I turned my phone back on at Dune. It's around 4:30, 4:45. I turned my phone back on. I check out the Patriots Jets score. 54 points. Goodness gracious. Was not expecting that when I turned back on my phone. So that was another nice extra bonus point at the end of Dune.
Yeah, we're not moving on here.
Okay. All right. Moving on.
Yeah. And it's fun talking Dune. And next up here on the Halloween Pop Culture Party podcast, we're going to go to Netflix. We're going to do Midnight Mass, Alan Austin. You have seen this as well. What do you think? What did you think about the show when you watched it?
I thought the show was good up to very good. And some certain episodes were excellent. Though, Mike, my hot take is that I thought the finale was by far the worst episode of the entire series. Very disappointed with the ending, but still, as a whole, I recommend this show to people. Though, in terms of Flanagan's TV show work and movie work of recent years, I will put this one below Haunting of Hill House, below Bly Manor, below Dr. Sleep, the director's cut. So it's in terms of fourth amongst those 3 most recent things, but still very enjoyable, very good, well above average. But in terms of what Flanagan can deliver, was disappointed with the finish.
All right, so that's John's take. I will go now to my conversation with Alan Austin. We're going to break the whole thing down for you, all 7 episodes of Midnight Mass right after this.